Tonight, my first speaker is going to be Dale Moss. He's a resident of Jeffersonville. He and I, we grew up together ever since about probably 14, 15 years old. We've been friends. He's participated in some of the functions that I put together, and he basically shined as a basketball player at one time, and we played Little League Baseball together. He went into greater things. He got real intelligent. He became an IU graduate. And a lot of guys know his father, Art, was a educator in Clark County, and he was probably one of the legends at his time. All the kids really respected him. A lot of the kids really grew up as Art as one of their friends. I remember Mr. Moss, and I was a downtown boy, and he was a East End guy, but he always recognized me and always talked to me, and I always respected that and always remembered that. And Dale's generally the same type of guy. Dale has a lot of friends. He has a lot of memories of people, and anytime that you run into Dale, he could carry any type of conversation with you, and that's what he's going to tell us tonight. He's going to tell us about all his adventures as a newspaper writer. Some of the things that I've read about Dale is that he's written over 3,500 stories, which is quite a bit of stories in 37 years of writing. And he wrote with the Courier-Journal. He started out in the Evening News. He has come back to the hometown of Jeffersonville. He's now writing with the Salem Leader, and he's given them some of his abilities, which I think is really good. So I'm going to turn it over to Dale and let him entertain you. I'm not a speaker.
Well, good to see everybody again. I think this is my third or fourth time. Standards haven't gotten any better, have they? I'm going to talk a little bit. Some of you may want to go see the Reds here in a little bit, so I'll be as quick as I can and answer any questions you have at the end of that. And at some point I may try to sell you a book. I'm also a pretty lousy, if Jimmy's a bad speaker, I'm a worse salesman. But I'm going to try to sell you a book before it's over. I just wanted to sort of catch up with you all since I have talked to you over the years, and I'm going to start at where we are now and kind of go backwards a little bit. I am in Salem now, which still sort of surprises me. I never would have ever guessed I'd be working in Salem. I work there 3 days a week. I still haven't figured out the easiest way to get there. There's no easy way to get to Salem, but I'm figuring that out. And I started in June in Salem. They asked me to come and work for their papers. They have 2 weekly papers there. And I am their managing editor, which sounds like kind of a big deal, but I essentially manage almost nobody since there's nobody there. But I'm the managing editor. And the first day I went there, I pulled up and parked behind a car that had a bumper sticker that said, "I do not trust the liberal media." And it wasn't Charlie Slade's car. It was. Turned out, and I wondered. I said, "That's a pretty interesting car to be parked in front of a newspaper," because everybody thinks everybody works at a newspaper is the liberal media. And turned out it was the woman who owns the paper's car, and she doesn't trust the liberal media. So I knew that my life had changed because I worked for the liberal media for pretty close to 40 years. And but that was kind of interesting. Well, it is ironic because one of the newspapers that I work for there is called the Salem Democrat. And this woman that I work for, who's kind of a character, I'll put it that way. I don't want to be insubordinate, I'll just call her a character, is probably never voted for a Democrat in her life. So she owns a paper called the Democrat, so go figure. But she and I share an office, and it's pretty interesting. We got this big office, and we talk into the evening about crazy stuff, and she tells me what she's been watching on Fox News, and just a gigger, right? I don't really watch MSNBC very often, but I tell her about all these things that I make up that I've seen on MSNBC, and she gets mad and threatens to fire me, and I get mad and threaten to quit. And but 3 months into it, I'm still there. And but what's interesting is that we talk a lot about the future of newspapers, and we can do a Q&A a little bit later, because I know everybody has an opinion about the newspapers and whether they're any good anymore, or whether they were ever any good. But she's the third generation owner of this operation where I work for, and she has absolutely no idea what the future is, or who in her family wants the thing. It's kind of like all of a sudden it's worth about 10 cents, you know, and she doesn't know what's going to happen. And it's that way with every newspaper pretty much anywhere. And we can talk about that, but it's an interesting place, Salem, and I've never worked in a really small town. There are smaller towns in Salem, but Salem's small enough for me. And I work mostly with women, and they're all into NASCAR, and they can talk about hunting all day long, and they all have husbands who I've met, and collectively all the husbands sort of look like the cast of Duck Dynasty. I think I'm the only person who's never seen that show, by the way, but I don't really need to see it. I'm kind of living it. Have you not seen it? But it's coming up on deer hunting season. In fact, maybe it started today. I'm not a hunter, and that's like Christmas in Salem. It's hunting season, so I'm kind of getting the hang of that. I probably won't write any gun control columns because I want to live, you know, we run, and one of the things as the manager, I'm supposed to plan these things, and they said, we got to allow a bunch of pages in the paper for deer hunting pictures. We run whole pages of people with their deer, and in the summer we had these whole pages of people with their fish, and I'm getting the hang of that. That's all kind of new to me, and that's small town, and that's sort of redneck area, but that's okay. But one thing I did like we ran this summer was a whole lot of people with their really big vegetables that they grew. That's a big deal too. And so we had a lot of pictures of huge tomatoes and various things. So that's where I'm at these days. I'm learning small town journalism. I'm trying to teach them real journalism, I would call it. They don't look at it that way, but and we're having fun. And they still run a lot of wreck pictures. Remember when the evening news would always have a wreck picture? And we're still there in Salem. If there's a wreck, it doesn't matter how big it is, we run out and cover it like it's a huge thing. And I'm trying to convince them that that's not a big deal. And again, it's kind of this back and forth, and I'm kind of losing on some of these fights, but I'm trying. But they called me out of the blue, and it's kind of fun to be called out of the blue. I don't know if anybody's ever actually been offered you a job. That's kind of neat. But before I did that, I was a full-time early retiree. And some of you kind of maybe remember that. And I wanted to just a couple of random thoughts about being retired. And I don't mean to offend anybody here at this thing, but there were two things that I learned about being a retiree, is that when you're talking to other retirees, it helps a lot with your credibility if you have an artificial hip or a knee or something like that. And I didn't have one, so I was kind of out in the blue on that whole thing. And the other thing was that there are a lot of people when you're out driving, like at non-rush hour times, 10 and 2, and a lot of people drive really slow. Really slow. And it's like my mother had taught them how to drive or something like that, so I can't get used to the slow driving, so I'm kind of glad I'm back as an actual sort of employee. And I want to ask you a question. I mean, if you could know when you were going to die, would you want to know? If you could, they would tell you it's going to be, 3 years from now on August 10th you're going to die and that sort of thing. Would you want to know? And I don't know how I feel about that, but when you get to retiring, you sort of start thinking about, you kind of start guessing, don't you, to some degree when you might die? I mean, you sort of, because you have to plan these things, and my parents would always talk about you need to save money for retirement, and then they'd also say, well, you got to stop and smell the roses and have a good time. Well, you kind of can't do both, can you? I mean, what if you stop and smell the roses and then live to 103? I mean, don't you run out of, so I'm trying to figure all that out and getting the hang of that. So I was worried about money. I shouldn't have to worry about money. I'm in pretty good shape, but I worry about money, which I guess is probably a good thing. A lot of people don't have money, don't worry about money, and kind of are probably happier than I am. But I was glad I got to work again, and because this retirement thing wasn't really working out for me. The very first day that I was retired, I was having lunch with a friend, and this couple comes over and sees me and greets me, and they own a really successful company here locally, and one that I really admire and would like to work for. I didn't apply, but and they, very first day, they offered me a job. I mean, I hadn't been retired more than about 3 or 4 hours, and I'm getting, well, this is a piece of cake, this stuff, you know, and everybody loves me, you know, and well, I kind of act a little smug and say, well, I've only been retired a matter of hours, can I, you know, be retired a little bit and then let you know? And I thought they said yes, but a few days later, I decided, yeah, I wanted to work for them, and I called them and left a message and emailed them and left a message and called them and left them. A year and a half later, I'm still waiting for them to get back to me, so it wasn't quite as easy as I thought it was going to be. I tried various things. I ran for the school board. I was probably the worst candidate in the history of elections. I did everything wrong I think that you can possibly do. And I would love to tell you that you ought to run for something someday, but I can't in good conscience suggest that. It was a miserable thing for me. I applied for it and got a job at the Census Bureau. But first they said they needed me to fill out some forms. They sent me a packet of stuff that literally was bigger than the New York phone book. And this was just for a, you know, part-time, go out and ask people questions job. I can't imagine how these guys that get these secret clearances and all that stuff, how did they get through? You know, I'm applying for a Census Bureau, and I had to fill out this much stuff. So I decided all of a sudden I didn't want to work for the Census Bureau, and so I turned that down. I did a few other things, but I didn't think I'd ever like anything like I liked working at the Courier-Journal, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. It ended sort of badly. People sort of have a misconception perhaps of how it did end for me. I took an early retirement thing. I didn't get fired or laid off. I got a nice, for them, a nice thing. They're not known to be nice, so anything they do that comes close to being nice was a pretty good thing. So I took that, and the writing was on the wall that the kind of work that I did at the paper was sort of the old model of journalism. If you notice, Bob Hill and other people that did what I did, when they retired, they weren't replaced. And when I retired, I wasn't replaced. And it's just kind of what I did was probably not going to last very long. Whether I lasted very long or not, I would probably have to do some other things, which I didn't really want to do at that point. There had been a lot of layoffs, a lot of furloughs. People talk about the paper being shorter. It's because there's nobody left to write there. It's a very small, depressing place, kind of. I don't know if you've ever worked at a place that's sort of dying. It's just kind of miserable and stressful, and hopefully you never have done that or will have to do that. But people ask me if did I leave voluntarily, and it's true, I did leave voluntarily, but I looked at it sort of like you voluntarily leaving a burning building. Sooner or later I was going to get burned, you know, and then so I was there 37 years full time. I did it even during college. Before that, covered ball games mostly, and I wrote. I was the Indiana columnist for 25 years. I did 3,500 just columns. I wrote a lot more other things, and I at least to myself talked about what I did or thought of what I did as I was in pursuit of the ultimate Hoosier, somebody that really just sort of encapsulated what Indiana's about or what Southern Indiana's about. And I wanted to tell you a few of the things that people that I bumped into over the years that I thought came close to being the ultimate Hoosier. A lot of it's sort of odd and quaint and funky and that sort of thing. I wrote about a woman whose job it was to find the biggest trees in Indiana. You know, I thought that was kind of weird. And another guy who had all these gauges and stuff in his car, and his job was to find out the bumpiest roads. He measured the bumpiness of roads, and he just drove around all day with all this stuff in his car. One guy, he ate at, this is back when Ponderosa, there were a lot of Ponderosa restaurants. He ate at Ponderosa restaurants 2-3 times a day, every day, and rated them for Ponderosa. I think eating at Ponderosa once was enough for me, but he did 3 or 4 times a day. I wrote about people that, and some of these may be people you might want to listen to, hear from sometime, that they're out there among us who are huge fans of the Civil War. And some of them have read 300 books about the Civil War and still think they need to know more about the Civil War. And, you know, as people just develop these passions and interests, some of you have, I'm sure, have these, and This is people that just did the Civil War. And another group I thought was interesting, they were metal detector fans, and they have these metal detecting contests out in the middle of nowhere that stuff gets buried in fields, and then they go and rim these fields, and somebody says go, and they go up with their things and see how many little things they can beep and dig up. And I mean, this is their life. I mean, this is what they do. I wrote about a woman who is addicted to the Weather Channel. She and I have been married 38 years, by the way. She can tell you at any given time what's doing in Topeka and all this stuff. I never quite understood, but I wrote about a lot of different things. I wrote about plus-size models. These people that some local people were really big into the plus-size model thing. I wrote about unsolved murders, a whole range of things. Wrote about a fellow here locally, or actually he's in Floyd County, a high school student who wears Indianapolis Colts stuff every day. I mean, not just like game days. I mean, every day, all year long, every year for years, he's worn Indianapolis Colts stuff. And I wrote about a guy who is a big IU fan. No, apologize about that. Who was extremely concerned because the school's colors are supposed to be cream and crimson, but he found out that now they've been kind of morphed into red and white, which to him was a lot different than cream and crimson. I mean, he was losing sleep over this. This was a big deal to him. And he mounted a statewide campaign to try to clear that up for once and for all. And I think most of the state thought he was kind of nuts and didn't pay attention, but this was a big deal to him. I wrote about a lot of odd people. I wrote about a woman who was extremely into Lassie. She had like 6 or 7 Lassies at her house. She just knew everything you could possibly know about Lassie. Remember the old show Lassie? And then a month or so after I wrote that, I get this autographed picture in the mail from Timmy, the guy who played Timmy. I don't ever remember asking for an autographed picture of Timmy. But, you kind of get these little perks, you know. I liked writing about people. Most of the people I liked writing about the most were the ones that didn't think they were anybody special. They were often, to me, the most special people. The ones that weren't trying to be special, weren't trying to get attention, and some of them were just absolutely shocked that I would want to write about them. And one of the best examples I use of that is a woman who taught Sunday school in New Albany for 75 years. And she went every Sunday. That was the biggest hour of the week for her, was that hour of teaching Sunday school. She thought I had the wrong number when I called her and wanted to do a story about her. And what struck me about her was that some of you are employers or used to be employers, and it's hard to get people to show up for work 75 days straight, isn't it? I mean, and she showed up for 75 years straight. And there were all those kind of people out there that just had these sort of passions and things that I thought were terrific. And she was one of those ones that didn't do it to be noticed. She didn't really want to be noticed, but I tried to, I talked her into doing it, and I think she was well deserving. And there are a lot of people like that I found over the years. I don't have a favorite column. I always sort of looked at it as I enjoyed finding new things better than I liked writing the ones I did find. I always thought the next one would be my favorite column, kind of those kind of things. But there were 2 or 3 that were sort of the oddest, and on some level they were the most favorite just because they were sort of weird. I wrote about a woman who she had a pond in her backyard, and she had bass in the pond, bass fish, and she taught these bass to jump up and eat pieces of hot dog that she would have in her mouth. And this was quite an accomplishment for her. I mean, this was you weren't supposed to laugh. This was a serious achievement. She had taught these fish how to jump up and eat hot dogs out of their mouth. And then the other oddest one, and this is slightly risque, and I apologize about that, but there was a doctor in Charlestown who was also an inventor. And this is back in the 70s, to give you some idea how long I was doing this. And in the 70s, you might remember that some women thought it was sort of cool or something to go around without bras. I don't know if you ever remember those days. But he thought